I am from the Student Counseling Center, so I'm a psychologist here on campus. So we see a lot of stress management sort of issues playing out. And really, stress management is something that everybody needs because everybody deals with stress. We need to talk a little bit about stress as kind of a natural thing. In fact, stress is normal. What would life be like if we had no stress? Think about that. Now, if you had a day in which you had nothing to do, you had no responsibility at all, nothing to turn in, no deadlines, nobody calling to see why you're not at work, you had a day with nothing to do, what would you do? Be bored. Be bored today? Enjoy it?
Just a day.
Just a day? How many of us would probably sit on the couch and watch Netflix? Okay. Eat potato chips, do things like that. And that sounds great. But what if every day was like that? Nothing would get done.
I can do it for about a year.
About a year's worth would be good. We need stress. Stress gets things done. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. But what we want to identify today is that too much stress can be harmful, and everybody tolerates a different level of stress. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can identify your signs of stress. We'll talk a little bit more about kind of some background information about stress, why it developed and why we have that. We'll talk about some sources of stress. We'll talk about stress in a college environment, and this can be geared towards students, but it also can be geared towards administrators, faculty, things like that, because we all are susceptible to some of the stresses of a college environment. And then we'll talk about how to cope with stress. We're going to spend probably about 20-25 minutes talking about all of this stuff, and then I'm going to demonstrate some technology that we have at the Student Counseling Center that you're all eligible to use that can help you learn to manage your stress. Think about physically, what happens to your body when you get stressed out? How physically can you tell that you're stressed? Your stomach? Your stomach gets upset? Headache? Tight. Tension in your shoulders, muscle tightness? Absolutely. Anything else?
Loss of appetite.
Okay. Can't eat.
Yeah.
Right. Or there's kind of a flip side to that. Some of us may eat more when we're stressed out, right? Okay. Anything else? Anybody else experience stress physically?
Can't sleep.
Okay. Sleep can definitely be bad. So you lay in bed and your thoughts just go here and rolling. What about emotionally? How do you respond and react to people emotionally when you're stressed out that's different than when you're not?
I'm more abrupt and shorter.
Kind of irritable, maybe. Yeah, irritability, definitely. Anybody else?
I take everything to heart.
Okay. It's hard to hard to let things go.
Start to talk louder, yell at someone.
Do you? Yeah. So things ramp up a little bit quicker. What about crying? Does anybody get a little bit more emotional when you're stressed out? It's a little thing start to get to you a lot more. Kind of that idea like you're sitting and you're watching kind of a commercial and there's like a teddy bear and you're just crying all the time. I don't know. We act differently when we're stressed out too. And these are the things that we do. And we mentioned a few of these, like maybe shorter with people, easier to kind of blow up. How else behaviorally do we have to do when we're stressed out? Think about this in the context of your relationship with others. Yes?
I cut off. Basically, I try to find isolation or a quiet spot, and so I don't want to interact with people. And other people do the opposite.
That's a really huge one. So you withdraw. I want to isolate, I want to be alone, I want to just... I think behaviorally that's the one that we see that's pretty common. When people get stressed out, a lot of times they pull back from other people, they retreat, they isolate, and that feels good because that takes less energy. And I think that's why we do it, is because I don't have to put energy into talking to somebody, gauging their reactions. It takes effort and energy to have a relationship, and when we're stressed out, we don't feel like we have that. Now, kind of the flip side, the bad point of that is that as we start to withdraw and retreat from people, we're left to deal with the stress alone. There's no distractions. And then your thinking changes when you get stressed out too. The way that you think, the way that you process information. Think about that. Have you ever had what's it like to sit and try and really focus on something when you've got a lot of different stresses? It kind of just jumps from thing to thing to thing. How many of you in here are good at multitasking? So when people say that they multitask, it's actually fairly physiologically impossible for your mind to split its attention. So you cannot focus on two things at once. People who are good multitaskers, what we see is that they're really good at shifting from one to one back again, and just jumping back and forth. For many of us who aren't good at multitasking, when we get stressed out, we try and do that, And then we end up running in a circle. We do a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, and nothing gets done. So we get very, very stressed out. The other piece that I want to point out with thinking is that when you get stressed out, you mentioned problem sleeping. When your mind gets kicked off on those anxious thoughts, it just runs and runs and runs and runs. The reason that our mind does that is because we are wired to solve problems. Okay, our minds do that. We see a problem, we see a solution, we apply the solution, the problem gets solved. But when we get to a point at which we start to feel overwhelmed with anxiety and stress, many of the problems that we're considering don't have an immediate solution. We might start worrying about stuff that's going to happen in a month or in a year. We might start worrying about things that other people have more influence over than we do. But our mind keeps worrying at those, trying to fix them when we don't have a solution. And that just makes us more stressed out. So let's talk about where stress comes from. Okay? And there are a lot of different kind of ideas about this. What we do know is that stress is linked to anxiety and fear. Okay? So the way that we process stress, especially if we feel anxious, comes mostly from this fight or flight reaction. It's an evolutionary response. Now, there are probably many of you here who know a lot more about evolution than I do, but kind of one of the things we do know about evolution is that species, as they evolve and they adapt and they maintain characteristics that help them survive. Okay? Stress has been around for thousands and thousands of years. We still have it. Okay? We haven't evolved that characteristic where we just are excused and we forget about it, but we still have stress. Stress is linked to that fight or flight reaction. You guys have heard of the fight or flight reaction? So what is the fight or flight reaction? How would you put that into words?
Where your endorphins kick in and tell you to take control or get the heck out of there.
Absolutely. So you're faced with a threat in the environment. Something is threatening to you. And so there's kind of that primitive center, fear center of your brain that turns on. And it starts to prepare your body to either fight or to get out of there. Now, physiologically, things start to happen in your body when that happens. Okay, it dumps adrenaline into your system. The blood starts to go from your small muscle groups more to your large muscle groups. You're literally mobilizing either to fight or to run away. This is a really good thing. Okay, if you are walking down a dark alley, 3 in the morning, and there's some shady people walking towards you, you want this to happen. You want this to kick on. Not here you want to come say, hey guys, how you doing this time of night? Okay? You need the fight or flight. The bad thing about fight or flight is that that impulse, that instinct to turn on fight or flight is on such a primitive level of our brain. It develops so early on that it doesn't sense a lot of nuance. It really works as a yes, this is a threat, or no, this is not a threat. And so there are things that can set that fight or flight response off that aren't truly a threat. With students, a lot of times what we see is that they'll go in to take a test. Okay, so it's a midterm exam, they're feeling a lot of pressure, and then all of a sudden they're panicking. This fight or flight response kicks in. Right? And that's what I say, like, I don't know of anybody, and maybe you do, but I don't know of anybody that has ever died from taking It's not a threat to your safety. Now, it is very intense and it is very stressful. I'm not trying to say it's not that way. But our body can't tell that we're not physically in danger. So it interprets that and it has the same response as if you were walking down that dark alley. There is a third option here, too, that I need to mention that we don't have up here. It's one that people don't know about. But they've actually identified that we either fight in response to a stressor, we flee, we flight, we take off, or we freeze. There's a third option. We freeze and we feel like we can't do it. Now, think about the last big project you had you just didn't want to do. Did you ever procrastinate it? Okay, put it off to the last minute, go and watch Netflix, do something like that. That's similar to a freeze response. Okay? And so we have that freeze response, which is the third option, which isn't a great one. Has anybody ever seen this before? Okay, some of you have seen this. This is a really important concept when you talk about stress management. And this is kind of the foundation of what we build on. What they've done is they've done a lot of research that's kind of linked performance levels to levels of stress, anxiety, or arousal. If you look at this, you've got stress and anxiety, and we turn that arousal on the bottom here. Then you've got performance on the side there. What you see here is that as levels of stress increase, as levels of stress get bigger, your performance increases too. Okay? And this is true for everybody until you hit a certain point. Everybody has a cutoff. Everybody has that point at which I feel overwhelmed and I can't cope. And what you see is that if you hit this overwhelm point and the stress continues, your performance drops off really quickly. Many, probably most of us in this room have hit that point at some point in our lives. Whether it was in school, whether it was at work, whether it was in a relationship, we hit a point at which we felt overwhelmed, we didn't know what to do, and many of us probably at that point started to check out. So in school, a lot of times what we see is when students hit that overwhelm point, they stop going to class, they start to retreat and withdraw, and things get worse. That actually contributes to the stress getting more. which hurts their performance. Now, I have to point out here too, that this again illustrates why stress is a good thing. Any of you in here play on a high school basketball, football, some sort of team? Anybody? Okay. Okay, you're nodding your head, so I'm just going to pick on you. So let me ask you a question. What did you play?
Volleyball.
Volleyball. Perfect. So on your volleyball team, did you ever play a team, and like leading up to the game, you knew you were better than the team? You were going to be ranked better than the team. You were going to do better than. You knew this wasn't going to be a hard game, and then you play them and they upset you, or they at least do a lot better than you thought they would. This kind of accounts for that, doesn't it? Because where's your stress level with that team? It's sitting right around here, right? You'll see this even in pro sports, college games, things like that, where you got a team coming in ranked really high, and you play a team that's not that good, and a team that's good. This is what's happening. They're not stressed out enough for their performance to kind of match that. That's why a lot of times those teams will play to the level of their opponents. That's also why you'll see these teams that aren't as good, that aren't ranked as highly, performing really, really well. Because they come in and they're sitting over here. They're stressed out. They've got more stress. Because again, this is kind of the foundation of stress. It's like I said, everybody has an overwhelm. And your overwhelm point is different, and yours is different, and yours is different, and yours. Everybody has a different level. So I can't sit here and I can't tell you when you know this is going on in your life, and this is going on, and this is going on, you're going to be too stressed out. Some people can manage that, and some people need a little bit less. So what are things that stress you out? Something is really you can tell what stresses you out because it's the thing when you wake up in the morning that you probably think about first and you're just not looking forward to during the day.
Test.
Test? It's a huge one. What'd you say?
So like if you're working in a group and like other people aren't doing kind of what they're doing or what they should be doing, and so then you feel like you have to take it on.
Managing a work group, having to do more work, absolutely. Anybody else? I heard another? Yes.
Presentation.
Presentation. Standing in front of people and doing that. I think public speaking, having to stand up in front of people, could trigger that fight or flight response as much or more than anything else. We're getting kind of a range of responses, and I want to point out that we get that range of responses because stress is different for everybody. Some of you may be stressed out by tests. Some of you may be stressed out by work deadlines. Some of you may be stressed out by clowns, because clowns are kind of scary. It's different for everybody. You know what I mean? And this also can help and hurt when you're dealing with somebody who's stressed out, because you may be talking with somebody who's experiencing stress, and you're not stressed out by that. You know how to manage that. You know how to handle that. So it's really easy to say, well, what are you so worried about? That's not a big deal. Public speaking, I can do that. It's not a problem. And that can actually contribute to their stress level. Okay. I've got the question up here: what stressors are unique to being a college student? But I want to broaden that a little bit, not just to the student aspect, but what stressors are unique to being on a college campus? Okay. So what's more stressful about being here? And I'll start that off. I think being on an academic calendar is more stressful because, at least over where I work here on campus, things get so much busier in October and November. Okay, and those are usually months that I used to enjoy. I love Halloween; it's really good. Those are really stressful times of the year for me. Whereas December, slacks off. It's okay. So being here on Texas Tech campus, what kind of unique stressors would you have here that you might not have somewhere else?
I would say then go to be a tier 1 institution and adding more faculty and enrollment increasing, and as a clerical staff at a university, that increases your workload and without additional assistance. So
yeah, it always takes a while for the additional assistance to catch up.
right, it doesn't catch up with all the growth.
Just travel time from one spot to the other on campus is difficult.
Anybody else?
Parking.
Parking. Absolutely. Parking is a huge stressor here.
Yeah, and the fact that you have to change up every semester, it's not, you get in a pattern and then you have to restart that pattern again the next semester.
I think that's true for everybody on a college campus. It's a cycle of change. You never could set your watch by it and have it last more than about 3 or 4 months. Students going through it, your class schedule is completely different every 3 or 4 months. Faculty, staff, a lot of times that's true too.